Welcome back, you guys. This is the Art School Graduate. I'm your host today. And let me tell you guys, today I have someone on this show. He's the founder of Vocal Type. He was on Forbes 30 Under 30, featured by AIGA, and he's collaborated with the GOAT, Spike Lee. We're going to get into design, legacy, protest, and purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Tré Seals. Tré, how are you doing, man?
Doing great. Honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. And yeah, I'm just excited.
Okay. So let's rewind it for a bit. You shared that your creative journey started during a really difficult time for yourself when you were younger as a kid. I'm just curious, what role did art play in helping you pull yourself out of that?
It was this really, let me back up. So that difficult period was at the ages of 4 and 8. I became a two-time brain tumor survivor. The first one I was 4, the second one I was 8. And, it's like I had my family there. I had the few friends I had because, I'm in kindergarten or first grade or whatever. And, but it's like art and writing became the things I needed to do for myself when the people weren't there. Because even then, I didn't expect people to stop doing like I wasn't so selfish to think that people could always be there for me. So I had to figure out the thing that could allow me to be there for myself. And drawing and writing became my means of doing that.
So was there a specific moment during that time where you were like, oh, I can make this my thing. Like this can be something I'm going to push through and be like, I can do this up until I'm an adult.
Oh, that came much later. I knew that I enjoyed it, but I did not know. And it was like I knew I enjoyed it. I knew what money was, but I did not. The two didn't correlate until much later. So let me back up. So kindergarten, I'm going to Montessori school where they only teach you how to write in cursive. And as a kid who got in trouble for drawing all the time, cursive became like drawing squiggly lines and doing work at the same time.
Right.
And I'll never forget when it really started was on the last day of second grade. This is like almost a year before my second brain tumor was discovered. We were allowed to do anything we wanted on the last day, very last day of school. So while every other kid was outside playing in this 90-degree heat, I'm inside looking at this like tiny 2-shelf library, and I came across an art history book, and I'm looking at all these paintings, and I had the nerve to try to recreate using these dollar store watercolors and a pencil. This painting Bridge Over a Pond of Water Lilies, I believe is the title. I believe it was Claude Monet, I believe. And when my second grade teacher saw it, she immediately went to my parents' car when school was over and was like, "You need to get him in art classes right now." And that's what really started it. My parents put me in art classes, and by the time I'm in 4th grade, I have a professional art teacher, and I'm drawing like really highly detailed pictures of sculptures of like Venus de Milo and David and Greek columns, and of course the traditional cones and spheres and all that kind of stuff. And then fast forward to a year later in the 5th grade, we go to this shop that was airbrushing t-shirts and sneakers when that was a cool thing to do. And this guy had all these different styles of lettering you could pick from that you could airbrush in your t-shirts. And I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. I could do this with letters. And that's when I started falling in love with graffiti, and I started my first business in the 5th grade, graffitiing people's names on index cards for $3.
Man, that's incredible. That you know what? We have a very similar little bit of background when it comes to graffiti. Graffiti was my first introduction to art. Like that was I've never saw an art gallery, never been to an art show. It was like when I was younger, just being an outside kid, riding their bikes and seeing it in the alleys and seeing it in the store, like just seeing it everywhere. That was my first introduction to art myself. And I was just like, oh, wait, this is dope. Like, I can actually read this too. I know what this is. Like, yeah, that's the part that caught me off guard. I was like, this is the one thing where I would stand there and look at it and just trace it with my eyes. Like, okay, that's a C, that's a, oh, that's an R. Look how he did that. And so that's how it started. So I very much that affinity for art and lettering came very early for me.
Most definitely. And it was really weird for me at the time because it's like, I was living on a farm and falling in love with graffiti. And, like, even though we're only, like, 10, 15 miles outside of DC, like, it wasn't like and I was actually born in DC, it wasn't like I actually spent a ton of time in DC outside of going to see my grandmother, like, once every other month or something like that. So, like, seeing graffiti in a t-shirt shop before actually noticing it in the streets and
Yeah.
still living on a farm at this time.
Wow.
So,
That's crazy.
yeah. Yeah, so I just looking back, just imagining what would be going through my parents' minds, like, how on earth did this kid.
See it one time and then just been like, "Yep, Imma do this."
Yep,
And this is before you could what? Take a picture on your phone, save it, like,
oh, yeah.
you had to visually just sit there and go, "Click, got it. Click, got it."
Exactly, like, my parents were still working with pagers. I think my mom had just gotten her first computer, and that was
Oh,
back
wow.
when, like, Microsoft Word still had the page was, like, that bright blue, yeah.
Dang, dude. Yep, absolutely. I'm telling you, mine was because we used to live in LA and then I saw a ton of it out there. Then we came to Pomona where I was raised, but we still would go back and forth to LA for like church and family and things like that. And there's this one huge piece in the LA River. It's now buffed, but it was a piece by a graffiti artist, Saber. It was
Oh, yeah.
huge. He did that. I would drive over that off of the 10 to the 5 back onto the 10. We would drive that like at least 4 times a week. And that's the piece I kept seeing over and over and over. And then I was like, man, this is dope. I didn't know people did things like this. So
Right?
so trust me, I was there with it as a little kid, just sitting there looking like, "Someone did that. How?" It's always the
Right?
how that got me too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's fast forward to design school. You're doing branding, illustrating, you know, freelancing, and then you hit this creative wall. Everything starts to feel the same. Take us through that moment. What did you see was missing for you during that time of design?
It was culture that was missing, honestly. And let me, like, rewind just a little bit.
Mhm.
So, like, after me selling these graffiti
Oh,
index
yes,
cards,
yes. I'm so sorry.
no, you're good, you're good. It got me interested in learning about other forms of creativity that I wasn't necessarily seeing around me, but was seeing online, because now we have internet. It was dial-up, but it was internet.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at fashion blogs like Hypebeast and High Snobiety, which I believe were just coming out around that time,
Mhm.
and, like, getting into rap music and looking at album covers. And what got me into graphic design was trying to create that avatar on Pharrell's cover in my mind.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, and, like, MySpace days, everybody was making those characters.
Yeah.
And when I was trying to recreate it, like, I didn't know what Illustrator was. I didn't know what graphic design was. I didn't know that was
Mhm.
but I knew how to actually draw vector paths in Microsoft Word.
Wow.
And
Incredible.
I was recreating Obey posters and trying to make my own, Pharrell avatar in Microsoft Word with the squiggly line tool. And when I started looking through, like, the album cover packaging, I found this company called House Industries, which was the first font foundry I had ever heard of. I'm like, "Oh, wow, wait, so I know somebody made these letters. I've never seen this style of lettering before, but I didn't know that there are companies that make letters for a living and sell these letters to people."
Wow.
And it was from there that I actually started drawing the basis for my very first typeface my senior year of, high school. So by the time I got to college, like, looking through Hypebeast and High Snobiety and looking at magazines like XXL and The Source and Slam and Complex and all these other magazines, I already had developed a sort of aesthetic mentally of what I liked and what I didn't like. So by the time I got to college, I didn't do much exploring in terms of style as much as I did exploring in terms of what tools I use to make those styles come to life. Um, so I got into it really quick, started freelancing extremely quickly. I think by my sophomore year of college, I was already freelancing and making logos for people. Fell in love with branding and doing that so much that by the time I graduated in 2015, I already done work for brands like Black& Decker, Whole Foods, and Panasonic.
Wow.
And basically I had made this pact with myself back in 2014 that by the time I was 25, I would become an internationally respected designer. I didn't know what a SMARS.
Shoot ahead of SARS.
Exactly. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it looked like, but but I wanted it for myself and I was willing to work for it. So I basically put everything I had into everything. So I took a job at a staffing agency in DC. Actually turned out a job for Pepsi for this staffing agency job. And that was because I didn't feel comfortable going to a job for 2 to 3 years that I didn't know if I would like and being stuck in their style and not being able to control how much or what I was going to learn. So I was the first full-time hire at the staffing agency in DC. I did that for about 2 years or a year and a half or so. And that meant as a full-time hire, I didn't get to pick where I worked as long as it was for more than a month.
Oh, wow.
And I worked at somewhere between 8 and 10 jobs over the course of 10 years for 10 different companies, from like in-house, studio, agency, everything in between. And 9 times out of 10, I was the only person of color in the office. And it was like the only time I got to communicate with people outside the office was like behind the lunch counter at the restaurant next door. And that's the only time I would see us. And didn't hit me why that was happening until I got the opportunity to read. Somehow I came across this article and started researching diversity in design by Dr. Cheryl D. Holmes Miller that was written in 1986, 87, entitled Black Designers Missing in Action. And it was one of the first times that anyone really brought the idea of diversity in design and the implications of what could happen and what was happening in a world that was extremely diverse and an industry that was supposed to reflect the world around it, but didn't have the diversity to actually do that.
Yes.
So it started feeling like to this point where it was like everything looked like it could have been made by the same designer. And, in branding, you keep going through this process of searching for inspiration, searching for the perfect font. And when you go through that process so many times, everything starts to look the same eventually, no matter who the client is. And thankfully, I think it was like a month after reading Dr. Miller's article, she published a sequel entitled Black Designers Still Missing in Action in 2016. And that's what made me want to somehow find a way to diversify design.
Mm. So I've had a conversation with Miss Miller myself, and she's dynamic. She's amazing, and she's very passionate about this. So was it something you were looking for and you found it in her reading, or did something in her reading stand out to you that made you want to change your role as a designer?
It was something in her reading that made me want to change my role as a designer. It's like her first article was like, here is where we are. And the second article is here's what the next generation needs to do. Is how I sort of took took to it and understood it. And when I look back on my life and thought about the days of, practicing my penmanship, graffitiing people's names on index cards. I even used to do hand lettering for tattoo designs when I was in middle school. And eventually drawing my first typeface in my senior year of high school. Starting a font foundry just made sense, like looking at that path, but then also thinking about if I really want to diversify design, like how can I do that through a font foundry? And I had to start thinking about my upbringing as a black man in America. And, I have this lineage that I really didn't get to talk about yet, but living and working on this farm that was established by my great great grandparents back in 1908.
Wow.
And I was brought up with the understanding of Black history and Black culture and racism. I experienced racism for the first time at the age of 7. Uh, was called the N word by the age of 9. But also think about my positive racial experiences outside of those situations. Like the pride I felt in learning about Dr. King and Bayard Rustin and Eva Peron and all these other people, activists of color, all the amazing things that we have done and given to society. And I wanted to find a way to merge my love for typography and telling these stories that could possibly put us in places and spaces where our stories and would normally never be seen or heard.
So, just curious, why did you choose to address diversity in design through language and through type? Because sometimes most people overlook that, but they don't understand that they encounter it every day. So, what was that thing that popped in your head to be like, you know what, I'm going to choose language and I'm going to go with it through typeface?
Well, beyond like tracing this sort of history and writing and graffiti and designing letter forms, I was also big into poetry and writing stories when I was coming up too. And part of that research in terms of not only designing type and focusing on language, but also telling stories through the work actually came from my background in graphic design. So when I graduated in 2015, I was extremely strategic. I started looking at, I know it was over 1,000 different portfolio websites, and I noticed something really interesting. Uh, so it was like agencies, design agencies, have case studies, and they tell you these long stories behind the work, and it's all impactful and it's all meaningful. So yeah, you get a deeper understanding of the work. Design studios write short case studies, so they might be 4 or 5 paragraphs tops, short paragraphs.
Yeah.
And then freelancers might might write a paragraph about explaining their work,
Right.
and then you still get no understanding of their work. And if I wanted to become this internationally respected designer that I had made this pact with myself about, I needed to study what agencies were doing, not what other freelancers were doing. So, and it was looking through the case studies that I realized that, okay, I can't just make things that look great. There has to be a story behind it. And
Yep.
through meeting other graphic designers and other people and design studio owners, I'll never forget the best piece of advice I got when it came to working with clients was you have to ask as many questions as possible and you have to design to answer those questions so that by the time you present the work and give the reasoning behind every decision, they can't refute the solution that you come up with. And that's how I've tackled.
That needs to be on the cover of every design Bible.
Right?
Right? When you open from the cover, you flip it over on the back, make sure you have done all your work, answered every single question so they can't refute it. Like, that needs to be in every design book, class syllabus, everywhere, because I feel like a lot of people, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but I feel like a lot of new designers run into that problem of like, well, if you don't like it, then. And it's like, no, no, no. Like, did you take them through the process? Did you take them on the story? Did you take them through the journey? And I feel like a lot of young designers are running into the problem where they're forgetting the step of the story and the journey, taking what they told you, and then you're placing it into this visual language that that the client or the customer can understand. And I think they're forgetting the story part.
Most definitely. And that's so huge. And it took me, and it wasn't until then that I realized how important not only being able to design was, but to have skills in terms of writing and presenting and speech writing as well. And it honestly, what this makes me think about probably what was one of the biggest turning points in my career was I think it was my senior year of college, and I wish I had heard this sooner. But they had this panel discussion of business owners, and it wasn't required or anything, but like you could get feedback on your resume and all that kind of stuff. And I don't remember who this guy was on this panel. I don't remember what he did. I'll never forget he said that every class you take is a future client because every client operates in a different industry that might be an industry that this class you're taking that has nothing to do with your major
Mm.
might involve. And every industry has their own language, and it's not important that you're fluent in every language, but that you at least understand. So I took that for me to at least mean that the best designers aren't just designers, aren't just good at design. You can be great at design and not be able to create a meaningful solution for your client. And that's what really changed it all for me, to be honest with you.
So looking at it, many people choose to have a tendency to stay away from typography because of literally the rules. There's many rules in typography that one must understand. Literally, the biggest one, is it legible? Can you read it from a distance? Some of the little smaller things like the kerning and the serif versus sans serif, like all these different rules in it. But you actually found like genuine understanding in understanding and power in knowing like, hey, what I'm creating with these typefaces and fonts, this is going to change how people see and read every day.
Most definitely. And I was looking at this with the understanding that most people who buy fonts are graphic designers.
Mhm,
So whatever I create to quote unquote try to diversify design, specifically diversify our sources of inspiration, it
mhm,
couldn't be work that I did for someone else. It had to be something that was useful to the design industry. And when I actually started looking into the type design industry, I guess it was 2018, 2019, I found this out. But there are only as many fonts as there are available and as many people there are that are selling fonts.
mhm.
There are only 200 people in the world, or 201 people in the world, who design type for a living.
Wow. That should tell you. I told you it's not an easy track to go on, dude.
It's not an easy track. And like, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of fonts that look cool that you could buy anywhere and download anywhere.
Mhm,
But like in terms of people who actually care enough to study the craft and pursue this for a living
yeah.
and make it accessible to other languages and care about these details,
Mhm.
it's around 200 people.
Wow.
It's probably like I doubt it's 300 now. I would be surprised if it was 300 now.
Wow.
So like when I say care about the details, I mean like you could buy a font on somewhere like, I don't know, Road Creative Market, but like I don't know what guarantee there is that compared to, let's say, an independent foundry that only sells on their website for a high dollar amount actually has the language that can support languages outside of English.
Mm.
So think of it in that way too. Like, how do I not only get these stories within the graphic design community in America, but
Yeah.
how do I learn to create all these different accent marks for all these different languages so that we can see the history behind Dr. King and Bayard Rustin in London or in Germany or in South America. So thinking all of that through in terms of not only diversifying design here, but diversifying design around the world, and basically just became a matter of how do I come up with a solution that will allow us to share stories from other cultures in a way that doesn't make you feel like you're having to read a history book
Mm.
and also to get that information. Yeah.
So I'm very curious, what sparked the thought of I need to include other languages from other countries? Because most people, I think, very much ignorantly just create for the English text. So what was that in your head that showed that you were kind of like, no, this needs to happen for someone in Guam, in Africa, in Vietnam, and all these other places? What sparked that for you?
It was most, how can I say this? It was more of this idea of how do I get these stories to be a part of a global community? Like, and I when I first started Vocal Type, the goal was to diversify our sources of inspiration.
Okay.
And why? Don't get me wrong. When I first started, I only made these fonts in English,
Okay.
and thankfully, I had an amazing teacher who taught this class on how to use this application called Glyphs, which is what I use to design my fonts. Taught us that in order to create great typefaces, you have to study the construction of other great typefaces. So looking at the works of other larger type foundries is what really got me interested in exploring other languages,
Mhm.
but also realizing that in order to truly diversify design, we have to get these stories in places and spaces where these stories and these voices would normally never be seen or heard.
Mhm.
So, like, one of my favorite examples is we had this font family called Eva. I was inspired by the first lady of Argentina, Eva Perón, who was a fighter for women's suffrage. back in the 1940s. And I'll never forget, I saw this design studio in London use Eva for a third generation men's fashion brand that was also in London. And that's when it really clicked for me the importance of designing type for basically, I guess you could call it cross-cultural communication. That's what it looks like to
Mm.
diversify design when you can get the history and the voices of this whole different culture and this whole different country into the design language of another culture and another country.
Mm. Man, that's crazy. I've never would have thought to take it to that level for typeface. I think that's probably my own ignorance, and I can call myself out because I do it all the time. But thank you for sharing that. I feel like it's a little bit of a history lesson on top of that major part which we talked about, which was that diversity in design. Like you're really diversifying all these typefaces for anyone, anywhere. So the thing I'm curious about is how do you choose which stories to communicate and to spotlight? Is it more of like emotional, like visual? Is it historical? Like what guides your decision when it comes to okay, like you just shared with forgive me, Eva? Is that what was that the name? So like what guides your decision in like titling it that and then the next steps further down the road?
Sure. So usually I find a reference first, like a reference image. And like, for example, that's what happened in the case of Eva. I came across this reference image from a 1957, I believe it was, women's demonstration in Buenos Aires. And looking at the letters on the banners, I realized that they were hand painted and not existing typefaces. That's also part of the research, figuring out if this typeface already exists. And then tracing what movement this image came from and what activists this movement was associated with to name the font name the font family or typeface after. But the starting point can always be different. That's what I love about this process. That the starting point can be, let's say, I want to make a font inspired by a specific activist, and then from there, figuring out what movement they were a part of, and figuring out a specific event within that movement that was really pivotal, that connect both the activist and the movement, and then designing the typeface from there. So, basically 3 different starting points, and all of them lead to the same end result. But sometimes, I'm extremely thankful for the community that we've been able to build. Sometimes people just recommend some typefaces that we should probably try to make. For example, the one of our typefaces, I think it was actually our first ever typeface. It's called Tank Man, and that was a recommendation from one of our community members to make a font family inspired by the protests in Tiananmen Square from 1989.
Oh, wow.
And same with VTC Ruby. I was introduced to this typeface that was actually named Jim Crow, and they had the letterpress blocks in their shop, and they couldn't stand seeing the name, so they put a piece of tape over the label, and they wrote Ruby for Ruby Bridges, who basically ended Jim Crow laws back in the '60s. Yeah.
That's incredible. So I'm curious, what is the process for like, how can I say this? Because it's like a lot of your typefaces, they're rooted in protest, history, excuse me, identity. So it's like, what's the process to create something with so much weight? Like we understand there's 3 starting points for you, but these carry not just like this simple fashion brand can pull from it, but it's like the weight behind the names and the history. Like, is it intentional to be like, we're going to take these very, I don't want to say traumatic, but turning points in history and add this layer to add another layer to it that can be accepted? Is that something you're thinking about?
I was thinking of it like one of my favorite quotes from a friend of mine. I don't even know if it was actually his quote, but he said, "The struggle is interconnected." And what I was thinking about when I first came up with this idea of making typefaces predominantly inspired by protest signage was that these protest signs were never meant to last longer than a day. And unless they got photographed, then the only way you would see these images and these protest signs were either in a history book or if you were actually trying to license that image for, let's say, your news site or your history blog. So what does it look like to extend these movements beyond that singular image? And what does it look like to take this tool that was never meant to last more than a day and make it a tool that can last forever? So basically adding permanence to a tool that was never meant to last and that we actually still need.
Wow. So I have a question regarding your website. One, phenomenal. As a graphic designer, I love it. It tickles my brain. It is a great creative expression of how to show work. I even showed it to a few of my design students, my college design students, when they're working on portfolio pieces, like what you want to do for a website. I was like, you don't have to be traditional, do it. It's beautiful. We'll show it to you guys a little later, but you do have this line on your website that says diversifying design, preserving culture. That's heavy. Like, what does it mean to you in your practice day to day?
Well, diversifying design was always the mission. And then preserving culture, it's one of those tricky things where I keep bouncing between preserving and expanding. Preserving in that culture, especially at this point in history, is such a difficult thing to do when there are so many people fighting to erase it. But at the same time, in like trying to preserve culture by preserving these stories and spaces in non-traditional spaces, like non-academic spaces, but also expanding culture and that when we're designing these typefaces, there's only so many letters that we can actually reference. So when I think of expanding culture, I mean like actually creating an entire alphabet and a full character set based on such a few reference points. And I feel like that's the balance. Like, what does it look like to preserve stories that we normally would never hear or really get the full picture of in a design context? And how do we expand those stories in terms of like every time you use one word typeface, I feel like that's expanding their history because you're taking something that was used for one point in time and applying it to a different point in time. And also continuing culture and continuing history. Like think about BTC Martin being used a typeface that was used for these protest signs for unionization, being used for the Amazon labor union logo or VTC Buyer, the typeface from a March on Washington, being used for the March on Washington to Free Palestine, or the 60th anniversary for the March on Washington. Like the history isn't something that is simply in the past; it continues. And by using our typefaces conti- for continuing that history and continuing that fight that we still have to fight for, I feel like that's always been my balance between preserving and expanding and continuing history.
So when you're creating these simply, I don't want to say one-offs, but when you're doing your research and you encounter these posters of protest, literally, like you said, they're hand drawn. So how do you get from, okay, this is the picture of reference? Because the one thing I'm coming to mind, which my grandfather was a part of, was the sanitation strike in Memphis. It says those posters said, "I am a man," right? My grandfather was a part of it. He was in Memphis. And so those posters I see and I'm like, those were hand drawn. So you take something that just I am a man and you create capital and lowercase A through Z, sometimes even numbers just off of those, maybe what is that? 3, 6, like 9 letters?
Right.
Oh, wow.
So there's this really interesting thing that I learned. I think it was in 2017. So 80% of the lowercase alphabet is based on the construction of a lowercase.
Really?
So picture this, and it's gonna sound really weird, but I hope I can explain this right. So you flip an N upside down to make a U. Okay. You raise the left side of the N to make a H. You remove the hump from the H to make a L. You dissect the L to make a I. If you cut an N in half, you have an R. If you cut off the bottom half of an N, okay, take the top half, duplicate it, flip it upside down, okay, and raise the left side, you have a B. You see it?
Yeah.
And then you rotate the B to make D, P, and Q. So there's this really there's really a system within this entire within the entire construction of the alphabet, but it's also what contributes to dyslexia. So if you don't make tweaks to, let's say, B, P, D, and Q to make them slightly different so that if you flip a D upside down, it doesn't look like a P or a Q. That's what contributes to dyslexia. So like making these tiny tweaks and also trying to like find ways to get around this system so that each character can be unique without distracting you as you're reading. Uh, that's always the balance. That's a huge part of the balance. And then the uppercase letters are just H, O, and V, and S is the only letter that you can't make from another character from another letter.
How did you find that out? I'm sitting here when you were saying it. I didn't want to seem rude because I wasn't looking. But when you said it, I had to look at the white wall that's right in front of me, and I'm like, oh my god, flip that.
Right.
Oh my god, rotate that. Oh my god, like it's literally hitting me every single time when you said it. I was like, oh my goodness, it is true. That is so true.
And when you look at that way, it's like, holy crap, dyslexia makes so much sense right now.
It does. Oh my god, it does. So, oh wow. Dude, so many light bulbs just went off in my head just visualizing that. Oh my goodness. I feel like there are so many people that didn't know that. Like if you're like for me, I just studied graphic design, right? I never honed in on just typography. Even though I love graffiti, I never honed in on typography. But hearing that, I wonder how many graphic designers actually know that. I can't be the only one that just thought and visualized that. I can't not be. That's incredible. How long did it take you to get to that, to understand that?
Oh, I did not realize that at all until I had my mentor taught me like how to actually construct letter forms, and I'm like, oh my god, because like at first I was drawing each individual letter from scratch, not knowing that I could have just deconstructed a few characters.
It saved you a week's worth of work.
Yeah, if not more. Like
Mhm.
so, like with that understanding, it doesn't really matter how many characters I have in a reference. I can deconstruct them to build other letters.
Wow. My man, you are an expert because that right there just blew my mind. You just take it and then just reshape the letter in.
Dope.
Oh man. Well, my students are gonna have a fun time next year. All right. All right. So let's talk about, designing with, designing with being critical and designing with love. You built your studio on your family's land. Brother, that's beautiful. That is, I think every designer's dream is to have your space where you create at some place you genuinely love. So, what is it like to create in a space that's so connected to your roots?
It is extremely special. And honestly, it's really peaceful. So, for full context, my great great grandfather was a carpenter and a mason. So, he built my parents' family home that is still standing using the materials that were on the land. And this was done back in 1908.
Oh wow.
And we actually, I'll never forget, we gutted my parents' house to redo the walls and floors. I think I was in middle school. And in the entire house, only one plank of wood had termites.
Golly.
And, and that was just the most amazing thing. Like, how?
Have you seen these new homes? Psh, might have termites right now. You don't even tell.
Exactly. And then just think about how genius he was. Like, I don't know whether or not he carved the land in any way, but we're in like the 100-year floodplain, and he built our house on top of a hill.
So he knew it was gonna come.
At some point, like we haven't had one yet, but at some point, so he built our house on top of a hill, and then on aside from the house, he built the chicken coop, which is now where my house is, and he built the stable, which is now my studio. And then back in the '80s, my dad attached a garage to it. So I basically broken down the walls between the stable and the garage and transformed the space into my studio. And then next door to my studio, my parents actually have their own business. So their office is next door to mine.
Oh, wow.
And,
That's
yeah,
great. Man, that's incredible. That is so dope.
appreciate it. And then
That talks to that history that you are
yeah,
always referencing.
yeah. History is amazing. I love discovering my history most of all, and just like, oh, I just feel like there's so much to it and there's so much inspiration with it that we don't really look to. And on top of that, my great great grandmother actually raised my dad, and she was this amazing, strong willed businesswoman. After my great great grandfather passed, she ran the farm, she ran a boarding house for teachers. She was the bank to the black community when they couldn't go to traditional banks. She would only sell land to the local black community so that they could establish their own legacy. And from what we could tell at one point, they owned over around 2,000 acres and sold most of it to members of the black community. And it's just amazing to see. I never thought of it when I was starting Vocal Type, but to somehow continue that legacy in a way.
Oh, wow. So how do you bring those elements into like your creative process? Like you're working from home, you get to look out the window and see literal history that your family has passed down and lived through. So how do you bring these elements into your creative process?
I never really referenced my history outside of my personal design studio until recently. We're in the process of rebranding Vocal Type actually. And I wrote this whole story around it, but I'll try to give you the shortest version. So when we were redoing the stable into my studio, we came across my dad's old DJ trunk. He used to DJ back in the 60s and 70s. And inside it was not only some old records, but my great great grandmother's purse. And inside the purse were over 200 legal documents, land purchases and loan documents that from whenever she had loaned money to people. And this was back in 2016 we found this.
Oh, wow.
Um, so back then, I was mostly running Studio Seals, my personal graphic design practice. So when I was looking through these deeds and contracts, I found out that when people had stopped using wax seals, the word seal would be printed next to the signature line and in different type styles. And sometimes they were more decorative or handwritten, but the stories were all typewritten. So the names of the people that were in these documents, what they were doing, that was all typewritten. Everything that was decorative was a template.
Hmm.
And that was basically the first part of this new Vocal Type rebrand. But for the studio seals, we were referencing those printed seals on her deeds. And when I was growing up, watching my parents run their own business, and to this day, they actually handle all their invoicing and delivery tickets and stuff like that on a typewriter. So as I'm working on this vocal type rebrand, I'm like, okay, there's a second typewritten reference. And then, as I'm learning type design, I found out that, when you look at typewriter fonts or fonts within code, those are called monospace fonts because every letter occupies the same amount of space, which I took as the symbol of what equality looks like in type design. And so basically those three reference points are what have influenced the new vocal type identity that is hopefully coming out next year. But I'm always finding new ways to reference what they left behind within my work. I don't think I've shared it yet, but we had a project last year with the New York Times and in a collaboration with US Bank. They had a legacy zine that they included within 2 issues of the New York Times. And it was supposed to be in honor of the 100th anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance, but it was meant to be more contemporary in that they're not just referencing history, but honoring the ways in which members of the Black community carry history forward.
Yes.
So for this magazine, I created a font family called BTC Sarah that actually referenced my great great grandparents' marriage certificate.
Oh, wow. You still have it?
Oh yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
We
goodness.
Yep, it's been framed in our. We have an ancestry room in my parents' house with all their portraits, including my great great
Incredible.
great grandmother's portrait. So I've always been surrounded by history, and it took me a while to realize that I've always referenced them indirectly until recently.
So have you, this is just me just being a creative, and I know you probably have, but I just have to ask. Have you ever looked at any of the actual penmanship of your grandfather or your grandmother and said, hey, let's turn these into a typeface or a font family? Because it's like they too found all of like the documents. I know back then mostly were probably handwritten. So it's just, did you ever look at those and say, hey, we have something here, like a good wealth of creativeness here?
Actually, what I thought was really interesting was, I mean, everyone wrote in cursive back
Yeah.
then, and what was interesting was looking at everyone's signatures, and their signatures aren't what you would expect today, which are basically scribbles. Oh, but it was but back then, their signatures were actually just their names written in their cursive handwriting. So I've definitely thought of what it looked like to actually turn their handwriting into a typeface, but also making cursive typefaces are the worst.
Oh, yes. Yes, they are.
Yeah,
Saris will kill you.
yeah. So we'll see.
Okay. I was just curious, man, because I was like having that wealth of just like almost free research. You know what I mean? It's like, oh dang, I have all this stuff at the tips of my fingers. Okay. That's incredible. So I'm just curious, when you're in this deep work, how do you know when something feels like off or intentional or like that? Like when you're in the deep work, like how do you know when something feels like, okay, I pushed it too far, or okay, it's not there yet? Like, do you have this internal compass that like kind of keeps you in that like authenticity of design?
I think it was this type designer Stanley Morrison. I believe that's who the quote comes from. But he said a typeface is a beautiful collection of letters, not a collection of beautiful letters. So meaning that the entire collection is beautiful, not each individual letter is beautiful on its own. So a collection of beautiful letters could be like it could basically look like a ransom note where it's like I have a black letter A, a sans serif B, and these are beautiful by themselves in the collection. But a beautiful collection is all the letters look beautiful together, then they do a part. So that's my main compass when designing typefaces. We're in the process right now of actually expanding BTC art into making more weights and italics.
Oh, nice.
And we just actually had a situation where it's like we made this beautiful at symbol, and it was based on the design of our currency symbols, which are different from anything else in the font family because we found new reference points. Um, but it looks like a beautiful letter within a collection of beautiful letters, not a beautiful collection of letters. So we ended up having to scrap it because it didn't match that level of authenticity that we strive for. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about these accomplishments and like a little bit of your creativeness. So you've worked with Spike Lee. You've been named on Forbes 30 under 30. Uh, Man, we can keep going. You are up there, and I have to give you your props. You're so talented and so blessed. But how do you stay grounded in the mission of your mission? Like with all this visibility that people have, they're reaching out to you. You have Fortune 50 companies, 500 companies coming to you for work. How do you stay grounded in your mission?
That's honestly the easy part.
Really? Okay.
I've met Spike quite a few times. And I'm just gonna use this as an example. But it's like he has had a career of stellar work and so many fans around the world. And I'll never forget my parents and I were at his studio. And my parents were like, "We love your work. It's all amazing, yada yada yada." And he sort of looked like he was tired of being praised because he's heard all the praises before. And it's like the praise doesn't phase him as much as the work does, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying I've gotten to that point, but it's like I work continuously. So it's like honestly have time to think about or appreciate accomplishments because it's always on to the next mission. So it's like, "Oh, I almost forgot Forrester 330 winner," because, like, I'm so busy thinking about this project that I don't have time to feel full of myself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's like, I appreciate that sort of recognition and stuff like
Mhm.
that, but I prefer recognition from my community than from validation from external sources that don't really care about my work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But listen, sometimes you gotta stop and smell the roses, and your roses is
Oh, yeah.
real nice. I'm just saying, man, but yeah,
I
that's
appreciate it.
incredible. Man, that's
But
incredible.
but yeah, I mean, I think I just love being around my community more than the validation of that other stuff. I'm like, it's nice, but it's not as fulfilling. Like, I'd rather see someone say they're inspired by my words than get an award.
Yeah.
Like, that I remember that more,
You
and that
it
keeps and that
touched them.
inspires me more.
It touched
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it drives me more than a past award does.
Wow. So in an industry where Eurocentric designs still dominates, what do you wish more creatives and clients understood about true representation?
Ooh, that's a good one. So, something I don't think we got to talk about yet, but, like, vocal type was my side project from 2016 to 2020. It wasn't my full-time job. It wasn't my main focus. I was trying to make money through this design studio. And George Floyd happened in May of 2020. Like, we just hit the 5-year anniversary, which is wild.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it was like people were looking for everything black and everyone that was black. And vocal type was one of two black-owned font foundries that people were aware of back
Yeah.
then. So all of a sudden, we barely had a working, functioning website. And it was like all of a sudden I had to let go of my last Studio Seals client to take 2 days, like 48 hours to build a functioning website. And like we literally went from 3,000 to 12,000 followers in a month. It was insane. And all of a sudden I'm getting emails from like Facebook wants a custom typeface, HBO wants a typeface, and all these people want typefaces. And part of it was like, and I think going back to your last question, I think that's what keeps me grounded is that while I know the work that I do is important, I know it's recognized because of George Floyd.
Oh, wow.
So I feel like everything I do is in memory of him because I don't know that vocal type or myself would be what or where it is today if we didn't have a pandemic and his death.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that's what keeps me grounded the most, now that I think about it. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
That just
no. I just
that just
give
kinda
you
hit me again.
space. No, I just wanted to give you a little bit of space, man, to get it out. And I understand the weight of what that did for people, negatively and positively. Like some people I've spoke to during that time, it was a very pivotal time for many black and brown designers. Like you're
Yeah.
not the only one. It hit people differently during that space.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to what true representation looks like, I feel like there's this interesting thing where it's like BIPOC designers know what true representation is for them, but the people who are hiring, like the marketing people, the talent acquisition, the marketing people, the advertisers who are hiring the people that are hiring us don't know what true representation looks like. So for the past 5 years, it's been like we're getting work during Black History Month and Juneteenth and struggling to get work outside of that. And I'm not saying it's like that for everyone, but like my busiest months for the past 5 years until this year actually was Black History Month and Juneteenth.
Oh wow.
And it's this really interesting thing where it's like I hate to say this, but like I feel like so like when I get interviewed, like I had I think it was last year I had the Washingtonian magazine print a retraction because they interviewed me for their magazine and said something about that vocal type makes typefaces inspired by Black history. And that's not true because we have typefaces inspired by all these cultures and all these histories from all around the world. But at the same time, it made me realize that I wonder if people see us, one, as focusing on predominantly Black culture and why we predominantly get work surrounding Black culture. Because Martin is the most popular typeface and most likely the only activist that most people are aware of. And there's this interesting tension between an honor that we get to do work that represents our culture because historically we didn't always get work that represented our culture. Sometimes the work was given to people who don't represent it and have no understanding of it. Like learning that we didn't make 99.9% of the jazz album covers that came out.
Yeah.
Or like we didn't make the poster for The Wiz.
Wow. Crazy.
So like it's an honor that I get to do this work for the culture that I represent. But also there's this lack of understanding in that we can do that same work for clients that don't necessarily want to highlight culture. Like I can apply this research-based methodology to any project that has nothing to do with Black culture.
Mhm.
But it's like we're at a point where advertisers and marketers only feel comfortable hiring Black designers for Juneteenth and Black History Month, Latinx designers for Hispanic Heritage Month, and it's like we're hired based on the months we're in, essentially.
Yeah.
So like trying to break out of that mold, I feel like is the goal of representation, or at least in my mind.
So, excuse me. What's one thing many creators who are going to listen and hear your story, how can they be more inclusive in their work? What's one thing they can do to shape their work so that it's more inclusive and it's showing the actual kind of like what we spoke about earlier, that story, the history, the transition through the work?
I think that's it, honestly. Just doing the research, whether that's making sure your design or solution doesn't already exist, or researching the implications of what it means for your design to be put out in the world, researching what communities you might or might not be harming by taking on X client. Yeah, just doing the research. I feel like it's the key to inclusivity. Yeah.
Okay. So I like to throw this round in here. It's my quick fire round. It's kind of like it kind of breaks it up and puts you on your toes a little bit. So just think of the thing, just say the thing that first comes to mind. A typeface you wished you designed.
Oh, that's a tough one. Um, I don't remember oh, let me back up. I know I started designing it and never finished it, but I still wish I designed it, if that makes sense. So you remember that S thing we used to draw in school?
Yeah, the 3 lines. So you had to
Yes. So, like, years ago before vocal type, I started making an entire font family where it was based on that S thing, and, like, it had multiple weights and, like, all the accents, and then like, in a dream world, it would transform into block letters and bubble letters. So, it's like, technically, it's like it's my dream project that I don't know when I'm actually fulfill, but it is something that I wish I made more, time for.
The funny thing is everybody calls it the S thing. No one knows where it started, and this was pre-internet because I was
Yeah.
doing it back in, like, elementary school and middle school, so it's just like, how did people from the West Coast to the East Coast to the South and all over know? It's just the S thing. Like, no one know what it's from or how it got started.
Like, I don't know about you, but there was this Instagram account that I think it's actually called the S Thing, and it, like, tries to track the history, and they have S Thing merch, like carabiners,
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
and they're like, "Here's the S Thing in ancient Egypt."
Like, what? And it's like 1980. It's like, what? How the heck did it make it? I know exactly what you're talking about. Oh my goodness. Okay. One historical figure you haven't made a font for yet, but you would love to.
Ooh, that's a tough one. So, we
Yeah,
have
I'll open it up to you. Give me your top three, just so you're not pigeonholed to one.
oh, no, you're good, you're good. There's this,
Okay.
there's this one that I wanna make. I was trying to make for this year, but I didn't have time for it, unfortunately. But there's this woman named Celeste. I forget her last name, but basically, and I'm not trying to, like, there's no hidden meaning in the history behind this. I'm just putting that out right now. So back in the 1960s in Portugal, basically the military worked to overthrow this dictatorship, and this woman named Celeste would put carnations inside the barrels of the rifles of all the military men, and they successfully overthrew the dictatorship, and nobody died. Which I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying that's what our military should do at any point, but like,
I get you. I get you. Yeah, I get you.
so yeah, that's one I really want to make. And I want to make more font families inspired by Bayard Rustin. I've been researching him lately, and I feel comfortable in calling him the activist. Like he does not get enough credit. So like he was organizing movements and working with relief organizations and like Guatemala, Venezuela, South Africa. Like we have pictures of him with like the first president of Nigeria and Ghana before they became president.
Wow.
Vietnam, he worked with liberation movements in England. Like this dude was all over the place. Anyway, just knowing that he was the one behind the success of Dr. King being able to get anything done, he doesn't get enough props that he really deserves. So I want to make more typefaces inspired by him. And I think it's just those two, honestly.
Okay. A protest sign that you'll never forget.
Oh my goodness. I saw, what was it? I think I used to post this for Christmas, but I found a image of Santa Clauses protesting the Nazi toys.
Oh wow.
That was the wildest, one of the wildest protest images I've seen. It was like they were like on a float. They had Christmas trees on the float, and they're all holding up protest signs.
That's nuts.
Santa's protesting Nazis. That has to be. I have to see that. I have to find that. That's incredible.
Oh yeah.
Okay, last one. Which of your fonts best matches your personality?
Oh my God, these are tough questions.
I told you.
I'd probably say VTC Bayard. It's a little rough, but it's also warm and quirky and bold at the same time.
Okay. So
So, before we wrap, let's talk about your future. What's next for Vocal Type and Studio Seals? Is it just going through this rebranding process, or are there any upcoming typefaces or collaborations you're excited about?
Most definitely. Well, aside from the vocal type rebrand and the site redesign, part of the site redesign, we're hoping to roll out a lot more features. Like we want to have creative spotlights where we actually interview designers who've used our typefaces and give them the platform to speak as well. What else? We're working on a new updated version of VTC Martin that's coming out this Juneteenth. That'll be variable weights and italics, and I'm really excited about that. We'll also have a more affordable version as well. And what else? Basically, right now we're going through some of our earlier typefaces and expanding those. So adding weights to VTC Marsha, adding more styles to VTC Bayard, adding italics to Tatsuro, and more things like that. Mostly looking forward to hiring more type designers so we can not only expand the catalog, but go back and refine some of these previous releases. As for Studio Seals, I'm still taking on graphic design work from time to time, but I'm very, very, very picky about who I work with, and I'm at this point where I only care about work that lasts, if that makes sense.
yep. Yep.
But thankfully, I have an agent that handles that, so I can mostly focus on vocal type.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay. And for young Black and Brown designers listening who love type, but they don't see themselves in the industry, what would you say to them?
Make the spaces you wish you fit in. That was one of the greatest lessons I learned coming up. Outside of just being a Black designer, I never really found a place that I fit until I made the space that I fit in. And don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to reach out to people for help. Don't be afraid to reach out to your design idols. I haven't met anyone that I didn't have a good experience with in the design industry. I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to meet and know just about all of my design idols.
Nice.
And I can honestly say that they're all amazing people. And it's really funny that, the people we looked up to were honestly just like us and going through the same client issues. And yeah, I think the community is more tight knit than you might know. And I know this is kind of cliche, but find your niche.
Yeah.
I feel like as a type designer, it's much easier to find your niche than to figure out a style as a graphic designer or illustrator. Like I was talking about one of my friends this other day. I'm like, you could literally make a type foundry based on anything you want as long as you're passionate about it. Like you can make a type foundry that just makes fonts inspired by the numbers on pocket watches.
Right.
Like anything you're passionate about, or like street signs in your country. Yeah. And just try and fail as much as you possibly can, because the more you fail, the better you get.
Yeah. And lastly, if you could go back and talk to that fifth grade you with the Sharpie and index cards, what would you say to him?
Keep going, keep trying, and fail more than you did. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Tré, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your craft, your vision with us. How can people find you and see your work?
You can find my work on vocaltype.co. That's our website, as well as our Instagram handle, vocaltype.co. You can find my personal graphic design work on TréSeals.com and at Tré.Seals on Instagram.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to my podcast. My name is Justin Robinson. I'm going to give it to him. The master typographer, Tré Seals, and this is the Art School graduate. We'll catch you guys later. Peace.
Perfect. Thank you so much, man. That was amazing.
Nah.